The most dangerous thing for me before I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder is that I learned to drink before I learned how to talk about my feelings. I just couldn't handle living the way I was living anymore. He did care. He wasn't an absent father. He was open to getting me help. In the hospital was one of my first breakthroughs. I had this huge external life that everybody else saw, and this internal life that was completely different.
Today's episode 3, Walk With Me Brother. I am meeting Ross Szabo. At 16, Ross was diagnosed with bipolar. At 17, he attempted suicide. Since then, he's built a life of managing his own mental health, but helping millions of others with theirs. Ross is the wellness director at the Geffen Academy at UCLA, the CEO of Human Power Project, and the author of Behind Happy Faces. But behind the titles, what makes Ross remarkable is his work for advocacy, giving people a clear message for mental health, something that I wish I had when I was struggling.
Hey, man.
Hi, mate.
Good.
How are you?
Yeah.
Nice to see you.
Nice to see you.
All right. Let's go and grab a coffee. You know this spot? So, Ross, I always like to start, with a little bit of the early story, yourself, your background, where you're from, where you grew up. But obviously, your story touched me immensely just because I wouldn't say it's very similar to mine in the sense of, I think you're a lot smarter and intellectually smart than me, but I know I think I saw one of your posts about living a double life.
Mm.
So talk to me about the early years. If I'm not wrong, you started drinking at 12?
I did, yeah. I think that the hardest thing for me really was I grew up in a family where nobody talked about emotions. So my parents loved me.
Yep.
And they did everything they could for us. But when I didn't have an emotional release and came from a family of such strong addiction and alcoholism, that first time I drank, I felt numb, and that felt better than anything else happening in my life. And so I think the drinking piece for me before, a diagnosis or before kind of anything happened was, I didn't know that at 12, I was literally lighting up a slot machine of addiction, and I didn't know where it would go. So
who gave you that first drink at 12?
It was just, you could drink family alcohol because it was around. Nobody actually gave it to me.
Yeah, just took it.
We were just experimenting. But I think the scary thing for kids is you don't know your biology that you're experimenting with.
Yeah,
You
especially
just
at
think
that age.
like, oh, I'm doing this, it's fun. And I always tell people the most dangerous thing for me before I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder is that I learned to drink before I learned how to talk about my feelings.
Mm-hmm.
And so as I went through treatment and recovery, alcohol was the thing I did more consistently than any other kind of thing. So I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder at 16, but I binge drank for almost every emotional trigger I had until I was 22.
Wow.
And hit rock bottom because I couldn't maintain the drinking.
So, from those early years, from the 12 to kind of 16, what kind of did you go through? Was it a regular, daily, weekly?
So
how often would it?
What happened? From 11 to 12, I visited my brother in a psychiatric ward. One of my grandmothers died. One of my best friends was killed. One of my grandfathers died. And so I just went through immense amount of trauma.
It's a lot of trauma.
But I didn't have access to alcohol all the time. I was probably getting drunk 2 to 4 times a month.
Okay.
Which again, if you're 12 13, 14, that's too much.
Yeah.
And then when I turned 16 and started having the symptoms of bipolar disorder, then I just switched to binge drinking to the point of passing out as often as I could because I just wanted to shut my brain down. And the only way for me to shut my brain down was to pass out. And then I kept doing that really from 16 to 22.
So talk to me about the diet, because something that I found remarkable as well was the diagnosis of bipolar at 16,
mm-hmm.
where the mental health, help in England at that time. America's light years ahead. I don't care what anyone says, but to be diagnosed at 16, talk me through that. How did you end up going to see a doctor? Or
I think at that point, my family was fortunate. My oldest brother was diagnosed with bipolar disorder when I was 11. And so it was at least in the ether that our family had mental health issues. I don't think I would have been able to get help had he not gotten help
Got it.
before me.
Okay.
When my brother got help, you have to remember, this was the first time in my entire ancestry of my family that somebody acknowledged a mental health issue.
Yeah.
And then I was reckless, so I was still functional on the outside, like good grades, everything else, but I was passing out all the time. And my middle brother was like, hey, this is not normal.
So you got two brothers?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so a friend of the family kind of intervened and was like, hey, you should go get help. And I was diagnosed at 16. The good thing about being diagnosed at 16 was at least I had a word for what was happening.
Yeah.
I think that the harder thing was I didn't have the coping mechanisms or the ability to manage it. And so while I was in therapy and they put me on medication, I just kept drinking. And if you drink alcohol when you're on meds, it's not going to do anything.
But talk to me, I mean, back then, being labeled bipolar at 16, that how did the weight of that, because that wasn't a thing then.
Yeah, and that was the 90s, right? Mid-90s?
Exactly, yeah.
What was interesting, though, was my oldest brother, who was diagnosed with bipolar disorder, had already graduated from the University of Pennsylvania at that point and was, like, pursuing his master's in astrophysics.
Wow.
So I didn't have as much of a stigma as, like, I can't do anything. But I only told a couple of my friends. I didn't, like, tell the whole school.
Yeah.
That I didn't come out with it until my senior year when I tried to kill myself. And, there was a lot of misunderstanding. I started sharing my personal story at 17 because of that lack of understanding.
Okay, so talk me through, obviously, being diagnosed to, that big year from 16 to 17, which I'm sure has shaped your life forever. So at 17, talk me through the suicide attempt and what led you to that point. And I know from my experience, it wasn't so much when I attempted suicide, which was a lot later than 16, 17. I was in my 30s, but I didn't necessarily want to die. I just didn't want to be in pain anymore. And I just didn't know how to, I just didn't want to see the darkness anymore.
And that was true for me. In September of my senior year, I just started feeling really lonely. I felt like there was no one to talk to. No one would understand me. But even if there was somebody to talk to, I thought I should suck it up. Like, I always thought one day I'd wake up and the loneliness would just go away. So I just kept pushing through, like, if I just get through this one night, everything will be okay. And then in November of my senior year, that's when it switched. And it started being thoughts of death, thoughts of suicide, all kinds of other stuff. And that built to the point where I was thinking about suicide and death 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And then that darkness kind of overwhelmed me. And it was like, I don't think I can get out of this.
So obviously at 17 and a big change in your life, probably what shaped you and changed for the rest of your life. The suicide attempt is 17. So how did you get to that point? What led you there? What, I know from my own personal experience, I was a lot older than you. At that time, I was in my 30s, but for me, it was just not wanting to be in pain anymore. It's like I didn't have any other option. I just didn't want to see the darkness anymore. So how did you get to that point at 17?
That was definitely true for me. What happened, I think, originally was in September of my senior year, I just started feeling really lonely. I felt like there was no one to talk to, but also no one would understand me. And I didn't have the emotional words to use anyway. So I was drinking a lot and feeling lonely and just thought like, one day this loneliness will go away. And then in November of my senior year, I started in thoughts of death, thoughts of suicide. That built to the point where I was thinking about suicide and death 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And again, I didn't talk about it. So for 2 months of my senior year, anytime I was in front of people, I put on a happy face. I made everyone laugh. I made everyone smile. So then I would go home and I would either cry myself to sleep or I wouldn't sleep at all because those thoughts of death and suicide were so persistent. But I didn't say anything. Like, I really thought I could suck it up. I really thought I could handle it on my own. I was somebody who was successful. I was president of my class. I was a varsity basketball player. Like,
wow.
I was doing everything.
So on paper, you had it.
Yeah.
All.
And then, it reached a breaking point for me where I did have a day where I thought, like, I can't do this anymore. And much like you, like, I didn't want to die.
No.
I just couldn't handle living the way I was living anymore. And I couldn't handle living with that pain. And so I thought the only way out was to take my own life. And when I attempted, luckily, they did find me, and luckily, like, I was able to get to a hospital, and they
Who
gave
was it who found you?
my dad. And you know, that was a really hard moment. I think for my dad, like, he did care. He wasn't an absent father, and he was open to getting me help, which was good. But I think for my parents, it was just so frustrating. Like, why couldn't I figure it out sooner? Why couldn't something click?
Yeah.
And so I was hospitalized for 2 weeks, but in the hospital was one of my first breakthroughs. It's when we had to talk about ourselves that I realized I had this huge external life that everybody else saw, and this internal life that was completely different. And it doesn't matter what age you are, if you do that for so long, like, you're gonna implode.
It's gonna crack.
So I actually felt relief when I was hospitalized. It was like, okay, I don't have to hide anymore. But coming out of the hospital is always tough.
Yeah. How did your friends and family react when you came out? Was there kind of a tiptoe approach around you? Or?
My closest friends were good.
Yeah.
My parents kind of just wanted to go back to normal. Like, all right, let's get you through senior year. Let's get you to college. And then the town I grew up in just didn't have a lot of understanding. So I grew up in Nazareth, Pennsylvania.
Good.
I was born in Bethlehem and raised in Nazareth, Pennsylvania.
Wow.
And so just because there was a lot of confusion and everything, when I was in high school, I actually started sharing my personal story.
Yeah.
Because there was a lot of confusion and rumors and misunderstanding.
That's bad. Talk me through what a language for mental health means. That's one of the things
I hear you. Yeah. I mean, it's one of my biggest things I talk about, especially with my students, is we have a common language for physical health. Like, you know, the difference between a sprained ankle and a broken leg, the difference between cancer and diabetes, between having a cold or having a flu. I think because we don't have a common language for mental health, we're limited. And so it is important to understand that there are different categories for mental health experiences, that everyday influences aren't your environment, aren't significant events, aren't mental health disorders, developmental disabilities, because we now live in a society where we don't have enough words for mental health. So if you don't have an expansive vocabulary, you're limiting what your potential is.
Yeah.
If you stop using words like nervous or scared or fearful or upset, and you just start saying you have anxiety for everything, you just have depression for everything, well, guess what? Your ability to conceptualize what's happening and work on it isn't the same. And so mental health literacy and a mental health vocabulary is one of the biggest things that I focused on throughout my work, because if we have that common language, at least we can have an understanding of where we are. And that puts everyone on the same page. Parents, kids, teachers, schools, everyone can understand it, much like we do physical health. Yeah. And the data backs that up.
So when, obviously you're doing amazing things now over at just outside your school right now, talk me through, like, when did you know you wanted to kind of work in that field? Was that from college years, or was it a little bit later in life?
That path was not linear. I started sharing my story when I was 17. And then when I was 23, I was like, well, why aren't there full school assemblies about mental health? Why, when I was growing up, did we hear don't drink, don't do drugs, don't have sex, but nobody said talk about mental health? And so I was in a really fortunate opportunity in Washington, D.C. at the time, where the Clinton administration had started the National Mental Health Awareness Campaign. And we got to work together to create the first large-scale mental health presentations in the country.
That's amazing.
And that was also fascinating. Like, I was 24, and I had some of the senior editors of the Surgeon General's report on suicide and mental health from 1999 following me to different presentations to see how people with lived experience could share their personal stories and be safe for them and their audiences. And so we started the first youth mental health speakers bureau in the country in 2006. And then we had this, like, group of people with different, backgrounds and experiences being able to share their stories safely. So that was the first venture.
So
was
24-ish.
Like, how do we create large scale mental health presentations?
Right. And then obviously jump into 2025 now. How do you, obviously there's a lot more from our kind of era and age, there's a lot more happening with mental health than it used to be. I know for me, even the last 10 years since I've been in America, I've seen a jump, and I've seen little spikes here and there. There's obviously one of the reasons I wanted to get more, and I felt this is my purpose in life to give back. But how do you see it now with today's modern, Gen Z, millennial?
The challenge today, and this is part of the reason I wanted to put mental health in classrooms, is this youngest generation has more of a language for mental health than their teachers, than their parents,
Wow.
because they're growing up at a time where you can talk about it. The challenge, though, is because there are more words and more things happening, they may not be using them correctly.
Yep.
And the whole reason that I wanted to have a school where we teach about mental health once a week and then have an institute in the summer to teach other schools to do that is to kind of like take a step back and give everyone a framework. There's a recent report that showed that 55% of high school students self-diagnose online, just on social media.
No way.
And so, as you know, once you self-diagnose, you believe that.
Yep.
And that's why it's important to teach the difference between being nervous or upset or freaking out versus having an anxiety disorder, the difference between being sad or devastated or lonely or isolated and having clinical depression, the difference between, what a body image issue is and an eating disorder is, and even teaching that spectrum for suicidality, that it starts with thoughts of existentialism and why am I here? And it can lead up to, wanting to take your own life if you hide those thoughts. So I think the more important work now is this generation is more open to mental health, but they still need skills.
Yep.
And you, believe it or not, can teach mental health in a school the same way you teach physical health. We don't do anything therapeutic in the classes about mental health at my school. Okay. It's a health education approach. It's here's a skill. Can you use it? It is not, let's all hold hands and cry and unpack our trauma. Yeah. And we were very specific about that because we wanted to create something that every school could do. We wanted to create something that everyone could have happen because now mental health is more pervasive and we just need frameworks to be able to manage it.
I just see so much pressures on today's generation, especially with social media. I mean, it's an amazing thing, social media. It brings people together. But I feel, I know for a fact, if I'd had social media in my day, I would not be here today. There's no way on earth. The pressures I think some of the kids are under, the acceptance that you're labeled. So from kind of, your age of being 16, 17, what do you see as a difference in today's kind of modern age?
It's a double-edged sword, really, right? Because they do have to be so much more hyper aware with social media than we did. And they do have to have boundaries, and they do have to know, like, they can't make their profiles public, and they do have to have a sense of almost growing up faster than we did. Yeah. In some ways, right? Because we're exposing them to things they should never be exposed to. I agree. At ages they should never have it happen. And then in some cases, we're not giving them the coping mechanisms they need to actually deal with it. So I give these generations a lot of credit for what they're managing. But then we can't just abandon them and leave them alone.
16 to 17, you were going through the binge drinking stage. I believe like you were waking up after 20 hours and talk me through that area.
That era for me sounds similar to yours. I was just drinking to the point of passing out. And I wasn't there to hang out with people. I wasn't there to dance or like meet people. If I was hooking up or I was doing any of those social interactions, it was by accident. It wasn't intentional. And again, it was just to like drown my problems, drown my issues. And so I started passing out a lot at 16, but by 22, I never stopped drinking and my tolerance was a lot higher. And so my rock bottom moment was I started at a party, I pre-gamed, I think, then went to like a formal, then went to a bar. And that's when I passed out for 20 hours. And that was the next day where I woke up and I was like, all right, you're either going to continue this and you're going to die or you're going to have to change. And I think a lot of people have that moment where they realize like, this is real. And if I don't do something about it, this is it. And I don't have a future. I always tell people the hardest lessons I learned that night were, one, I think the most dangerous people in our society are people who hate themselves. You know, when I hated myself, I had no consequences. I could drive drunk. I could make bad decisions. I could do destructive things because I didn't care what happened to me.
Yeah.
So I had to learn to love myself. And when you have that deep self-hatred, it's hard. And I think it's especially hard for men. I think we have to compare ourselves and do so much with other men. And, you know, unfortunately, guys' way of getting along with each other is roasting each other. And when you hate yourself and you're getting roasted, it can cut deeper. It can be harder to come out of. So that journey to liking myself was not easy.
I understand. I mean, I wouldn't say I'm probably at that point yet, but I think I'm getting there. And I think this is definitely one of the areas where I'm improving. You know, I'm coming out, you know, you start your story at 17. I guess I'm starting at 45-ish. I've seen my purpose in life. You know, I made a promise to God. I made a promise to myself that I was going to help others. And if I have to walk and run across the country to do it just to get people's attention, then I'll do it. And if I can help one person out there, and if my message touches someone, so your message has touched mine, and I think hopefully mine will resonate. And I believe that's the way we have to pay it forward. And obviously what you've done is remarkable.
But I think you bring up a good point too, because you do have to believe in something bigger than yourself to get out of this. And while social media gets so much attention for envy and all this other stuff being like causing anxiety and depression, you know, there is another theory that if we don't believe in something bigger than ourselves, that's also led to the mental health crisis. And I think it's a combination. I don't think there's one theory. I don't think there's one fix to this, but I think that your power and your strength and your family and God and giving yourself a sense of purpose and something else is healing. It is healthy.
For me, finding your story, there was one touch point there, which again, I kind of wish I had. Taught me through I believe it was a teacher who had kind of said to you, you know, I support you, and taught me through that, because that must have been a massive kind of relief in the sense that you had somebody on your side, of somebody authority and who you looked up to.
One of the biggest reasons I think I became a teacher is because I had a teacher who cared. So in my darker moment, when I got out of the psychiatric ward in my senior year of high school and went back to high school, there was just a lot of lack of understanding. So I did lose some friends. I did get called a psycho. I did get called a crazy kid. I did have a lot of rumors about me throughout the school. And this teacher was like, okay, well, what can we do to address this? And his idea was to bring a psychologist in to talk to classrooms. And when that psychologist came in, unfortunately, he used really extreme examples of people with severe mental illness. And the students in the classroom were laughing. I don't think they were laughing at me. I think that they were just nervous, but it felt like they were laughing at me.
Yeah, sure.
And that hurt because I'd just gone through a psychiatric ward visit.
Big flashlight.
Yeah. And I took my teacher in the hallway and I was like, hey, this isn't funny to me. Like, this isn't working. And he looked down at me in a very rural Pennsylvania way. And he was like, well, what do you want to do about it? And I was like, let me speak. Let me tell people what it's like to go through this. And he said, okay. And so he let me speak that day, 2 weeks later, sorry. And then he brought me back to speak to classrooms for the next 5 years. And so what I think is powerful about that is he looked into my eyes when I hated myself and said, I care about you. And he looked into my eyes when I didn't believe in myself and said, I believe in you. And that's what I try to do with my students now is like, just, you know, tell them I care, tell them I believe in them, because you never know what the ripple effect of that is. And you never know where people are going to go with that kind of sense of belief. And I do think, you know, schools have had to become so careful now of like everything you can do for valid reasons. Like there's grooming, there's all kinds of like really horrible stuff.
Sick stuff.
But this is also the biggest period of loneliness. And we can't just take out caring from a school. We can't take out investment from a school. We can't take out teachers being themselves when they are genuine and they are thoughtful, because it can create some problems.
Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit about your work right now. 4 buckets: everyday influences, significant events, mental health disorders, development disability. Talk me through what this means in kind of like my language so I can understand it.
What you're asking about is mental health literacy. And so what we have found at UCLA is like with 60 years of physical health literacy, people could name their body parts, identify when something was wrong, seek help sooner, and normalize conversations about their body parts. The journey for mental health literacy is just beginning. And so the idea is the same. What if with mental health literacy, people can identify what's going on sooner, seek help sooner, normalize conversations about it, and take care of their minds? And so there's kind of a couple cornerstones. One is having a clear definition of mental health so that we treat mental health the same way we treat physical health, knowing it's not about just having an illness or a problem. It's about how you take care of yourself. The piece you're talking about is separating mental health challenges into different categories. So everyday influences are things like stress, sleep, body image, self-compassion, things that affect all of us on a daily basis. They can be positive or negative, depending on your experience with them. Your environment, home you grew up in, school you go to, way you're raised, relationships, family, that's a separate bucket because that affects you differently and it's more persistent and it shapes you. Significant events like starting a relationship, ending a relationship, identifying your sexual orientation, whatever it is, are experiences with loss, change, or rejection that can be positive or negative. Then mental health disorders or disorders, developmental disabilities or disabilities. And we need that separation because if mental health is just one umbrella, then people are treating all of those things as the same. And if we're treating all of those things as the same, we're not building the self-awareness we need to name it and then figure out what to do about it. The other thing we teach is that there's a spectrum of mental health similar to physical health. With physical health, you think, what am I experiencing and what do I need to do to address it? So if you have a cold, you take some cough drops and some tissues, you go to work. If you have the flu, you stay home. We want mental health the same way. Am I just stressed out? Do I need to go for a walk? Do I need to exercise? Or do I have something more severe that needs more support? And then we do talk about brain development, just knowing the difference between like your limbic system and your cortexes. So like fight or flight versus rest and digest. And then also like how to help peers. So one of the biggest things I always teach schools is whether we want to believe it or not, kids are on the front lines of mental health more than mental health professionals. In almost every school in this country, every night, there's one kid begging another kid to stay alive. We don't have to teach them how to like suicide prevention of talking a kid out, but we can teach them basic skills of what to do to support someone.
Okay, so skills you can practice on a walk, 1 minute reset, coping mechanisms.
Sure.
Yeah.
So super easy, just 1 minute mental health walk skills. Okay.
Well,
I got you.
Yeah.
So I think for me, I'll just talk about me personally. Yeah. Connecting with nature is a huge change for your mental health. Right. So if you're going to walk, don't just put on the noise canceling headphones and put your playlist on. Yeah. Or like texting or something. Look around, like notice leaves, notice what's in your environment. Take a moment for that. Some other things that I tend to do are practice gratitude. It's very easy for me to go downhill quickly and spiral. I have, like we were talking about, my origin story is filled with self-hatred. So when certain things happen to me, it's very easy for me to be like, and this sucks, and that person shouldn't have done that, and go outward. It's harder for me to go inward and be like, I am grateful that I have whatever this opportunity is. I'm grateful that I have my fiance. I'm grateful that I have my family and my friends. I think in this world of social media, we see what everyone has all the time, that we don't do that for ourselves. And then the other thing is just some self-affirmations, just some small ones where you're on nature, you're practicing gratitude, and you're saying like, hey, you got this, or you can come back from this, or, whatever your self-affirmation is.
So talk to me, you just touched on it there a little bit. Talk to me about managing your bipolar today, at your age you are now, and obviously it's very different to when you were 17. So how do you cope now? I mean, you obviously have so much other weight to carry from your students, but then there's your own personal kind of time. So how do you manage it today?
It's been an evolution to manage bipolar disorder from 16 until, my 40s, right? That's a huge, 3 decades. I don't like to admit it, but it's 3 decades. And It was an evolution for me too. The first part was like needing structure and understanding every single moment of my life to separate what was the disorder and what was me. And I think that's a really hard first step, is seeing like, okay, I'm going to put myself in a routine so that I can better determine like, is this the disorder or is it me? And then from there, I grew up in a blue collar town. So my first coping mechanisms were very hard on my body. I'm going to lift weights. I'm going to run far. I'm going to do all this other stuff. And then I realized that I was trapping emotions in my body. That was a really harsh realization, where I was burying the anxiety in my body and had lost like 50 pounds.
Wow.
And so then I had to start connecting to my body, doing yoga, doing other things. Then I found this really amazing Ayurvedic breath work, which is a 21-minute cadence, where you hold this cadence of breath and then a 7-minute kind of refractory period where you come out of it. And that really unlocked my trauma, got me to see my inner child and embrace him and let him know it's okay, got me to like kind of balance and have everything that's going on. I did do some psychedelic treatment to release the trauma even more that I'd been burying.
So what was that?
So it was the two very guided, assisted psilocybin treatments that had a therapist and were walking me through my inner child, really, allowing him to play again instead of face trauma and grow up and do all the things he had to do. And then now it's a combination of the breath work, spending time with the people I love, exercising, and I think it's just really that combination for now.
One of the reasons you touched on there, like a bit about the walking outside. This is exactly why, for me personally, to do this podcast now, to be outside walking is everything that I stand up for. Like one of my team members mentioned to me today, would you be interested in doing a Zoom call with someone? I'm like, no, not really. So I know right now it's getting to, for me, it's meeting people face to face. I think COVID really hurt me, like being locked down mentally. I mean, my life didn't change too much because I've been working remotely, but to have that point where I was locked off and didn't have the access to the gym and was stuck on a computer inside, it was it brought back a lot of darkness to me and being inside. So that's why, we're fortunate to live here in LA where it's, kind of 9-10 months of sunshine. And I know not everyone has that kind of privy experience where they live. It might be dark or rainy, but I grew up in Manchester, England, where it's very glum. Hopefully, we've got some parents watching this episode today. Even better if we've got, some 16, 17-year-old young men. They're not boys anymore at 16, 17, you're young men. And what would the conversation that you would have, like put yourself, if you had to speak to yourself at a 17-year-old, what kind of conversation would you have today? Like what kind of conversation should parents be having with their, so I think it's just that age, 15, 16, 17, 18. I just think that as a hormonal, I've got a nephew who's 14 right now. And I told my brother, remember, he's going to be going through so much right now. So what kind of conversations would you have to yourself back then?
So those are two separate conversations, what I would say to myself and what I would advise parents.
Yeah, okay.
Luckily, I do teach a lot of students at my school and can have those conversations. I have conversations with young men all the time about mental health. And the things that I try to emphasize to them are that it does take more strength to talk about these issues than it does to hide them. When I was 17, I thought that was different. I thought it took more strength to hide it, and hiding it is what almost killed me. And so it is important to understand that it takes more strength to talk about these issues than it does to hide it. It is also really important, I think, if I was talking to my younger self, I think the hardest thing I had to find in therapy was that it is okay, that I was going to be okay, because I spent so many nights scared and alone and literally crying myself to sleep thinking it wasn't going to be okay. And I didn't have someone to hug me and reassure me. And I think a lot of times that's what I needed as a young man. And that's what a lot of the young men that I talk to every day need too. It's just that reassurance. What I would say to parents is it's two parts. It's one, trying to have the difficult conversations because they are hard. Your kids' personalities are shaped pretty early. They're not like these massive changing things. And when they have the hormones rushing through them, they dig deeper into their personalities. So don't ask the standard question, how are you? I work with an organization called the Kids Mental Health Foundation, and they have these conversation cards that go deeper. But you don't even need to buy cards or anything. Like, you can Google difficult questions to ask your kid, and like, it'll come up. But you also need to model it. And that's where parents struggle a lot. I think sometimes when parents are trying to connect, they don't know themselves enough to do it. And so they end up unpacking their own unprocessed trauma on their kids. So they see their kid, they get frustrated with them, and they're like, well, when I was your age, I had to do this, and I did this, and I tried this. And that is like, that's not even a language that they can speak. No. So it's trying to find something that's relevant to them. You can use your personal story. They do need role models, and they will turn to their parents more than they turn to social media if their parents are consistent in providing that balance. So like, one example would be, if you see your kid struggling with school or something like that, instead of being like, well, I also struggled and I just had to figure it out. Like, you could say, what are you struggling with? And if it is paying attention, or if it is something else, then it's like, yeah, I can see how that's hard. Ask them questions about why it's hard. Ask them what they see their friends doing. Bring them into the conversation, and then maybe share something relevant. But also realize that it may not be you who's the one who breaks through to them. It might be a coach. It might be an aunt, an uncle. It might be somebody else. And so, it's a team effort. It's not going to just be you.
We talked about how to address parents to children. How would you approach the conversation of the other way around, of young men opening up without shame in today's world?
And this is a question that I hear a lot from my students and from college students as I travel around the country, because I work with a lot of fraternities to develop mental health education that's mandated through all of the men's fraternities, that they have to do this mental health education piece. And I think the most important thing is, if you're going to tell your parent or someone that you need help, to come at it from a place of your own confidence, that you are trying to compare this to a physical health issue. Like, approaching them and saying, hey, I have been feeling really lonely. I have been feeling like I might not make it. I am really scared, and I need help. And it's time for me to get help and talk about it.
That's a big kind of jump for somebody that age, to kind of to have that, to open up. And it's the vulnerability. I mean, it took me 30 years, to admit to my wife that I had a problem. And then slowly, through therapy and through, family members, and, like I mentioned to you, I think when other people who are close to you in your family start to notice that there's something not right with Uncle Rob, or, is my son okay? So when you get those kind of questions, but that's such a big jump for a 15, 16, 17, 18-year-old to kind of come out and say, hey, I've got a problem. Because, I don't care what anybody says, there is still a stigma today. And again, with the social media and things like that, I mean, it's crazy. We've only been doing this for a couple of months, but I've had messages of hate already, saying that, mentioned to them about what nobody wants to hear your problems. But I've had thousands of messages of support, dozens of messages of hate. And, most of these people are hidden behind like a stock image so you can't see who they are. But I still feel for today's, generation, that obviously the work that you're doing, your schools are doing, that the educator is just light years ahead of what we had. But I just still think there's a vulnerability there, especially, for someone like yourself who was in sports, and you can mask it well. So yeah, I find that really interesting, just having those conversations, and what you're doing is remarkable to these kids' lives. It's like, for me, it's a modern day hero, because, and one of the things we'll be doing when we're on the road next year is visiting high schools, and all I want to do is share my story, that I was beyond rock bottom. I think you've got to go to that suicide level. You go several layers underneath rock bottom. I mean, rock bottom for some people is losing a family member or, ending a relationship, which is trauma. But I think what kids need to realize that there is another way out. There is another way out. I think that with the help and with the support, and I think with the education and with the healthcare, I think, we'll do this together. And like I said, I think it's been a remarkable story today. I just recently this year, one of the, great things I kind of have done through my sobriety and is I wrote a kid's book called When I Close My Eyes. It's about a little boy who dreams at night and he dreams of having a sister, and in the morning he's got a sister. So tell me through a little bit about your book and what that is helping and educating.
Yeah, so I have two books. One's called Behind Happy Faces, Taking Charge of Your Mental Health. That book I wrote in 2007. And it was after speaking to around 500,000 people, the same questions kept coming up. Anywhere I went, rural Iowa, Los Angeles, New York, Montana, right? So it was like, why isn't there a book to answer all these questions? And so that first book really is, hey, here's what these issues are. Here's why people don't talk about them. Here's how it affects people of different, genders, sexual orientations, like race, everything. Here's what you can do for yourself. Here's what you can do for your family. Here's what you can do in friendships. Here's what you can do in relationships. It was pretty straightforward, like using probably 20 other people's personal stories as versions of success. And then in 2020, I wrote a kid's book about anxiety. It's for kids ages 5 to 8. And that really is to just explain the difference between feeling nervous and actually having an anxiety disorder, because kids are really smart. And if we don't give them that variance between nervousness, fearful, scared, worried, versus having an anxiety disorder, then they might think everything's anxiety. And they won't have the education they need, and they won't start coping with it the ways they could. And so that book shares my personal story about like, hey, here's what an anxiety disorder looked like for me without treatment. Here's what it looked like when I started getting skilled.
For someone in pain today, what would be your message? What would be your one sentence that you would share with them?
The hardest thing when you're in that level of pain where you really don't think there's another way through it and you're close to giving up is to just know that you're not alone. You're really not alone. In today's society, I think you think you're supposed to have so many friends and so many things happening and so many things to rest your hat on. Like, you're just not alone. And if you're able to see you're not alone, and if you're able to see that even one other person cares, you can start your journey with that place. You can start your journey out of that fear and that just kind of devastation that you might be on your own. And I think that once you realize that there is a light, that there are some other people around you, you can take that first step.
Yeah, I mean, the boys in your classroom, have you found it like where one person kind of comes forward, another one kind of has that ripple effect? Have you seen that happen? Or
I just shared this with a researcher because that there's a ton of there's a big concern right now about the young men's mental health crisis and masculinity and everything else. I teach a class on healthy relationships at my school. So I've been talking to young men about healthy relationships for 9 years. And what I've seen is if you are an adult male, and you're having conversations with teenage boys about relationships, they love it. They want to have that conversation. They want that connection, and they want someone to just be real with them about what's going on, because no one talks to young men about relationships. No one talks to them about, self-defining memories or attachment theory or conflict resolution or all these other things. And so what I've seen is when you have a connection and a conversation with young men, they gravitate towards it and they want to do better. But we just keep leaving them alone. And we just keep, in some ways, blaming them for not having the skills without actually engaging with them and giving them the skills.
All right, Ross, thank you for walking, sitting, having a coffee with me today. Your story is remarkable. It's generationally changing. You've helped millions of people already. So I just want to thank you for your time. I think what you're doing, keep doing what you're doing. And just thank you for everything, all the information you've given. I know you're going to be helping a lot of others with this today as well. So thanks for coming on.
Thanks so much, man. Appreciate you.
All right, keep up the good work.
Thanks.